I still remember the exact shade of red her face turned when I slid the prenup document across the dinner table. Stunned silence fell over the restaurant as Megan, 7 months pregnant and clutching Daniel's hand, realized her carefully orchestrated plan was crumbling. My husband's expression shifted from confusion to panic as I calmly pointed to Clause 16b. Any child conceived during extramarital affairs receives no financial claim to the Johnson family assets. The holiday music playing softly in the background felt almost comical against the tension that thickened the air between us. I hadn't planned on spending our anniversary dinner this way, but when your husband's pregnant assistant shows up claiming he's the father, sometimes the prenup you insisted on 5 years ago becomes your most powerful ally. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I used to think I had everything figured out. My name is Rachel Johnson, and 5 years ago, I was walking down the aisle toward Daniel, the most charming tech entrepreneur Denver had ever produced. We met at a charity gala where I was coordinating the silent auction for the Children's Hospital. He donated a ridiculous amount for a weekend at his Aspen cabin, then immediately asked if I'd join him. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. 6 months later, we were engaged. Our wedding was featured in Colorado Living magazine, not because we were famous, but because Daniel's rising tech company had put him on the map as a local success story. Johnson Technology Consulting had grown from a startup in his garage to a $30 million business with clients across the country. I had my own career in marketing, a master's degree, and a reputation for being meticulous about details. That's why, despite Daniel's romantic protests, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement. "We don't need that, Rach," he'd said, pulling me close in our Cherry Creek kitchen the night before meeting with lawyers. "What's mine is yours, always." "It's not about not trusting you," I explained, running my fingers through his dark hair. "It's about being smart. My parents lost everything in their divorce. I won't make that mistake." He signed it, eventually. Catherine Mitchell, my college roommate turned family law attorney, made sure it was airtight. Looking back, that document was the first domino in a series of events that would eventually save me. The first 3 years of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We traveled extensively, renovated our dream home, and built a life that looked perfect on Instagram. Daniel's company continued to grow, and I transitioned to consulting work that allowed me a flexible schedule. We discussed having children someday, but agreed to wait until his business stabilized. We were the couple other people envied, successful, attractive, and seemingly in sync. The subtle shifts began in year 4. Daniel started working later, his phone constantly buzzing with notifications. The business was expanding to the East Coast, which meant more travel, more late-night conference calls, more stress that manifested in short tempers and fewer conversations over dinner. I told myself this was normal, growing pains in both marriage and business. That's when Megan Taylor entered our lives. "I've hired an executive assistant," Daniel announced one evening, his eyes bright with enthusiasm for the first time in months. "She's brilliant, Rachel. MBA from Northwestern, experience at 2 tech startups. She'll handle my calendar, travel, communications, everything I've been drowning in." I was relieved. Maybe this would mean more time together, less pressure on our marriage. "That sounds perfect. When do I get to meet her?" "Soon," he promised. "She's still getting settled in Denver. Moved here from Chicago." I did meet her 3 weeks later at a company function. Megan was undeniably capable, articulate, polished, and clearly intelligent. She was also strikingly beautiful, with auburn hair and confidence that commanded attention. I noticed how she anticipated Daniel's needs before he voiced them, a fresh drink appearing as his glass emptied, important contacts seamlessly introduced at exactly the right moment. I also noticed how her hand lingered on his arm when she laughed at his jokes. "She seems very Attentive, I commented on the drive home. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. That's her job, Rach, to anticipate what I need before I need it. Something in his tone, defensive perhaps, sent a small warning flare into the night sky of my consciousness. I chose to ignore it. Over the next 6 months, Megan became an increasingly central figure in our lives, or rather, in Daniel's life. She reorganized his office systems, restructured his client management approach, and became indispensable to his daily operations. She also began texting him at all hours, including weekends. The messages were always ostensibly about work, but they created a constant current of connection between them that excluded me entirely. "Do you really need to respond to that right now?" I asked one Sunday morning as we had breakfast on our patio. The October air was crisp, the mountains visible in the distance, and Daniel was typing furiously on his phone. "It's important, babe. Megan's prepping for the Westridge presentation tomorrow. This deal could double our annual revenue." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You know, Daniel, I have an MBA too. I could help with presentations if you needed." He looked up, surprise evident on his face. That's not necessary. Megan has it handled." "I'm sure she does," I replied, setting down my mug with perhaps more force than necessary. That was the first weekend I spent alone in our home while Daniel went to the office for emergency prep. He came home late Sunday night, exhausted but elated about the presentation. I pretended to be asleep when he crawled into bed, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt. Olivia, my best friend since college, noticed the change in me before I fully admitted it to myself. We were having lunch at our favorite cafe near the Cherry Creek Mall when she placed her hand over mine, stopping my mindless stirring of already dissolved sugar into tea. "Rachel, what's going on? You've mentioned Daniel's assistant 12 times in the past 30 minutes. I set down my spoon. "Have I? I didn't realize." "Something's bothering you about her. What is it?" I hesitated, the words feeling both petty and terrifying once spoken aloud. "I think something might be happening between them. Daniel's never around anymore. He's constantly texting her. Last month there were 3 business trips where she accompanied him." Olivia's expression remained carefully neutral. "Have you asked him about it?" "Every time I bring her up, he gets defensive. Says I'm being paranoid or jealous of her professional contributions." "Are you? Jealous, I mean?" I considered this. "Not of her job, but of their connection. They share inside jokes I'm not part of. He lights up when she texts, and..." I swallowed hard. He deleted his text message history with her when I asked to use his phone last week. My phone was dead, and he handed me his, but snatched it back saying he needed to check something first. When he returned it, their entire conversation history was gone. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her lunch forgotten. "That's not great, Rach." "I know, but what do I do? Install spyware on his phone? Follow him to work? I don't want to be that person." "You could hire a private investigator," she suggested. "But honestly, your gut is probably giving you the answer already." She was right. My intuition was screaming. But I needed evidence, something concrete to confirm or deny my suspicions. That night, I logged into our shared cloud account, not expecting to find anything incriminating. Daniel was too tech-savvy for that. But I discovered that his phone automatically backed up photos to the cloud, including screenshots. There, in a folder from 3 weeks prior, was a screenshot of a hotel reservation confirmation. The Langham, Chicago, a suite, dates matching his supposed solo trip to meet with investors. The reservation was for 2 guests. My hands trembled as I continued searching. There was nothing definitive, no love letters, no explicit messages. But I found more hotel confirmations, dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants I'd never heard of, and a screenshot of a jewelry purchase. A delicate, Sapphire necklace ordered 2 days before my birthday. I never received a sapphire necklace. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. I needed professional advice. Catherine's law office occupied half a floor in one of Denver's gleaming downtown buildings. Her assistant showed me directly to her office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the mountains. Catherine rose from behind her desk, concern evident in her expression. We hadn't spoken in months, both too busy with our respective lives, but one distressed phone call had cleared her schedule for me. "Rachel," she embraced me, her familiar perfume momentarily comforting. "Sit down. Tell me what's happening." I sank into the leather chair across from her desk. "I think Daniel's having an affair with his assistant." Catherine's expression remained professionally neutral as I detailed my suspicions and the evidence I'd gathered. She took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "What do you want, Rachel? Are you considering divorce?" The question caught me off guard. Despite everything, I hadn't actually considered ending my marriage. "I don't know. I guess I want the truth first." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The truth can be painful," she warned, "and once you have it, you'll need to act on it one way or another." "I understand, but I can't make decisions based on suspicions." Catherine nodded. "In that case, I recommend documenting everything. Continue monitoring the cloud account. Check credit card statements, phone records, anything you have legal access to as his spouse. And Rachel," her voice softened, "prepare yourself financially, just in case. The prenup is solid, but only if we can prove infidelity, which the agreement specifically addresses. We need evidence, not just circumstantial hotel bookings." I left Catherine's office with a checklist of items to gather and a hollow feeling in my chest. That evening, I created a secure email account and began forwarding myself copies of everything I found. I also noticed that Daniel had started working from home more often, bringing work back to our house rather than staying late at the office. This struck me as odd given his earlier patterns, but I said nothing. The following week, Daniel suggested, "We host Thanksgiving dinner at our home." "My mom's coming in from Phoenix," he explained. "And I thought we could invite Jason and his wife, maybe your sister Emily and her husband. Small, intimate." I agreed, grateful for the chance to establish some normalcy. Perhaps I was overreacting about Megan. Perhaps the holiday season would help us reconnect. I threw myself into planning the perfect Thanksgiving. Our dining room was transformed with autumn decor, the menu meticulously crafted to accommodate everyone's preferences. Daniel seemed more attentive than he had in months, helping with preparations and staying close to home. My suspicions began to feel distant, perhaps even unfounded. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I was organizing the guest room for Daniel's mother when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this Rachel Johnson? We need to talk about Daniel and Megan. Meet me at Blueprint Coffee tomorrow at 10 a.m. It's important." My heart raced as I stared at the message. Could it be a prank? A trap of some kind? I considered ignoring it, but curiosity and dread propelled me to respond. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows the truth. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I didn't tell Daniel about the message. The next morning, I dressed casually and drove to Blueprint Coffee, a small cafe in an area of Denver I rarely visited. I arrived early, selected a table with a view of the door, and ordered a latte I had no intention of drinking. At precisely 10 Dao, a woman entered. She was perhaps in her early 30s, professionally dressed, and scanning the room with purpose. When her eyes landed on me, recognition flickered across her face. She approached my table. "Rachel?" I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me. "And you are?" "Allison Martinez. I worked at Johnson Technology until 3 weeks ago. I was in accounting." My mouth went dry. You said we need to talk about Daniel and Megan. Allison folded her hands on the table. I was let go after questioning some expense reports. Specifically, expenses filed by Megan Taylor that Daniel approved without the usual documentation. What kind of expenses? Hotel rooms categorized as client accommodations but without corresponding client meetings. Gifts listed as business development with no recipient companies attached. Weekend trips classified as research retreats. She paused. I'm not telling you this for revenge, though I won't pretend I wasn't angry about being fired. I'm telling you because I would want to know if I were in your position. Do you have proof of these expenses? Allison reached into her bag and withdrew a flash drive. Copies of everything I flagged before they terminated me. I shouldn't have these technically, but ethical accounting practices matter to me. I took the flash drive, my fingers trembling slightly. Why are you really doing this, Allison? Her expression softened. My mother stayed with my father through 20 years of infidelity because she didn't have financial independence or evidence to enforce their prenup. I won't be party to another woman being deceived that way. After she left, I sat in the cafe for nearly an hour, the untouched latte growing cold. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket. I wasn't ready to look at its contents yet, but I knew I needed to secure it somewhere safe. When I returned home, Daniel was in his home office. On a conference call, I heard him laugh, that genuine laugh that had become increasingly rare in our home, and then say, Megan, you're brilliant. This is why I can't function without you. I quietly made my way to our bedroom and locked the flash drive in my personal safe, hidden in the back of my closet. Then I continued Thanksgiving preparations as if my world wasn't potentially about to shatter. That night, Daniel was unusually affectionate, pulling me close in bed and suggesting we take a weekend trip to Aspen after the holidays. Just the two of us, he murmured against my hair, like the old days. I wondered if he could feel the rapid beating of my heart, the tension in my shoulders. That sounds nice, I managed to reply. The next morning, while Daniel was in the shower, I accessed the flash drive on my personal laptop. Allison hadn't exaggerated. There were months of questionable expenses, all approved by Daniel, all connected to Megan. Most damning were the hotel charges that aligned perfectly with Daniel's supposed business trips. Linda Johnson was the first to break the uncomfortable silence in our living room. Daniel? His mother's voice carried that particular tone, mother's perfect, the one that demands an explanation without explicitly asking for it. She set her wine glass down with deliberate care, her eyes darting between her son and his very pregnant assistant. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, everyone, this is Megan Taylor, my executive assistant. She's been instrumental in our East Coast expansion. His voice was steady, professional, as if this were a board meeting rather than our Thanksgiving dinner. I mentioned we might have another guest, but I wasn't sure if Megan would be able to make it. I had no recollection of him mentioning any additional guests, and from the confused expressions around the room, neither did anyone else. My sister Emily caught my eye from across the room, her eyebrows raised in silent question. I gave her the smallest shake of my head, a gesture we'd perfected in childhood when signaling, not now. Well, I said, clapping my hands together with forced brightness. The more the merrier. Megan, let me take that casserole for you. Everyone, dinner is almost ready. As I led Megan to the kitchen, I could feel the weight of everyone's stares on my back. The casserole dish was warm in my hands. Sweet potato with marshmallows, I noted absently. A traditional Thanksgiving dish that suggested Megan had given this appearance considerable thought. Thank you for welcoming me, Megan said as we entered the kitchen. Her voice was confident, but I caught the nervous glance she threw toward the living room where Daniel remained. Daniel has spoken so highly of you. Has he? I placed the casserole on the counter and turned to face her fully. Up close, Her pregnancy was undeniable. The rounded belly, the subtle changes in her face. 7 months along, according to Allison, which would coincide perfectly with Daniel's New York trip. Of course, she smiled, resting a hand protectively over her stomach. The gesture seemed deliberately pointed. Your home is lovely. Thank you. I'm curious, though. What exactly did Daniel tell you about tonight? Her smile faltered slightly. That it was time to be honest. That hiding things wasn't fair to anyone, especially with the baby coming. The calm that settled over me was surprising, almost out of body. I had imagined confronting Daniel's infidelity would feel like drowning, but instead, I felt strangely anchored. I see. And the baby is due in February, she supplied, her hand still cradling her belly. A boy. Congratulations, I said automatically. Would you mind helping me bring these dishes to the dining room? Everyone must be hungry. I saw confusion flicker across her face. This wasn't the reaction she had anticipated. Good. The dining room had been my pride, and joy when we renovated our home 2 years earlier. Cherry wood table long enough to seat 12, crystal chandelier overhead, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Now, with the snow gently falling outside and candles flickering on the table, it should have been the perfect setting for a holiday meal. Instead, it felt like a stage set for a drama none of us had rehearsed. Daniel had recovered somewhat in my absence, making small talk with Jason about their latest client acquisition. He jumped to his feet when Megan and I appeared with serving dishes, rushing to help us as if this were an ordinary dinner party. Here, let me get that, he said, taking a heavy platter from Megan's hands. Their fingers brushed, and I saw her give him a small, reassuring smile. The kind of intimate, wordless communication that develops between people who share secrets. Everyone, please take your seats, I announced. Daniel, would you do the honors of carving the turkey? As we settled into our places, I noticed that Megan had positioned herself directly across from me, with Daniel at the head of the table between us. A perfect triangle of tension. The first few minutes of dinner proceeded with the awkward politeness of people determinedly ignoring the elephant, or in this case, the pregnancy, in the room. Jason's wife Sophia commented on the turkey's perfection. My brother-in-law Mark asked about the wine selection. Linda kept glancing between Daniel and Megan with narrowed eyes. So, Megan, Emily finally said, setting down her fork. Daniel mentioned you moved here from Chicago. How are you finding Denver? It's been wonderful, Megan replied, dabbing her lips with a napkin. The mountains, the clean air, the sense of possibility. It feels like the perfect place for a fresh start. And perfect for raising a family, I added, raising my wine glass slightly in her direction. When are you due? The table went silent. Daniel's knife clattered against his plate. February 12th, Megan answered, her gaze steady. Though first babies often come late, I'm told. First babies conceived in May often arrive in February, I agreed pleasantly. Isn't it interesting how timing works out? Daniel was in New York. In May, if I recall correctly. Daniel's face drained of color. Rachel? What? I'm just making conversation. I turned back to Megan. You accompanied Daniel on that trip, didn't you? The East Ridge investor meetings? Before she could answer, Daniel interrupted. I think we should discuss this privately, after dinner. Why? I asked, spreading my napkin across my lap. Megan clearly came here to tell everyone about the baby. Isn't that right, Megan? That's what Daniel meant when he said it was time to be honest? The atmosphere in the dining room had transformed. Entirely. No one was pretending to eat anymore. Even Linda sat frozen, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. Yes, Megan finally said, her voice softer now. I'm tired of hiding. We're tired of hiding. We? I repeated, arching an eyebrow. So you're confirming that Daniel is the father of your child? Rachel, please. Daniel's voice had taken on a pleading tone. This isn't how I wanted. How did you want it exactly? I interrupted, my calm facade finally cracking. Were you planning to wait until after the turkey but before dessert to announce you've been sleeping with your assistant? Or was the plan to wait until after your mother left town? I think, Jason said, standing abruptly, that Sophia and I should probably go. He looked genuinely pained, torn between loyalty to his business partner and the evident discomfort of the situation. No, please stay, I said. Since we're all gathered for Thanksgiving, we might as well have everything out in the open. That's what holidays are for, right? Family truths? Emily reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, grateful for her silent support. Daniel is the father, Megan stated, no longer bothering with pretense. We didn't plan for this to happen, but we've decided to take responsibility and move forward together. Together, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. How very responsible of you both. Linda finally broke her silence. Daniel Michael Johnson, she hissed. What have you done? Daniel looked at his mother, then at me, then down at his plate. Mom, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. Rachel, I was going to tell you. I've been trying to find the right moment. When exactly is the right moment to tell your wife you've impregnated your assistant? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice remained. Before or after suggesting, a romantic weekend in Aspen, just the two of us? Before or after watching me plan this entire Thanksgiving dinner for your family? Megan looked genuinely confused. You invited me, Daniel. You said Rachel knew that you'd discussed everything. He lied, I informed her. Apparently, he's quite good at that. Daniel pushed his chair back from the table, the scraping sound, harsh in the tense silence. I can explain everything, but not like this, not with everyone watching. Why not? I challenged. Megan clearly thought this was the plan, a public announcement at Thanksgiving dinner. Very festive. My sister stood up. Mark and I are going to step outside for some air, she announced. Mom Johnson, would you like to join us? Linda seemed torn between wanting to witness the unfolding drama and basic decorum. Perhaps that would be best, she finally agreed, rising shakily from her chair. Jason and Sophia followed suit, mumbling awkward apologies. Within moments, the dining room had cleared except for Daniel, Megan, and me. The half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner lay abandoned between us, steam still rising from the gravy boat. You knew, Daniel said once we were alone. Not a question, but a realization. How long have you known? Long enough, I replied, though not about the pregnancy until recently. That was a special holiday surprise. Megan shifted uncomfortably. In her chair, Daniel told me you two had been having problems for a long time, that your marriage was essentially over in all but name. I laughed, the sound hollow and unfamiliar even to my own ears. Did he? How convenient. We didn't plan this, Daniel insisted, gesturing vaguely toward Megan's belly. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Daniel. You made choices. Multiple choices over multiple months. Hotel rooms don't book themselves. Expense reports don't falsify themselves. His head snapped up. What are you talking about? Allison Martinez sends her regards, I said coldly, before you fired her. For questioning your creative accounting, she made copies of everything. Quite thorough copies. Megan paled visibly. You went through company records? No, they came to me. Apparently, ethical people don't appreciate being fired for doing their jobs properly. I turned my attention back to Daniel. The Langham Chicago looked lovely, by the way. Did you enjoy the executive suite? The company certainly paid enough for it. Daniel's expression shifted from defensive to calculating. I had seen this look before in business negotiations. He was reassessing, looking for leverage. Rachel? I know you're hurt and you have every right to be. But we need to discuss this rationally, for everyone's sake. Rationally, I repeated. You want to have a rational discussion about the fact that you've been having an affair with your assistant, spending company money to fund it, lying to me for months, and now she's pregnant? Please, enlighten me on the rational approach to that scenario. Megan placed a protective hand on her stomach again. I understand you're angry, but stress isn't good for anyone right now. We need to discuss arrangements moving forward. Arrangements, I echoed. Something inside me hardened. They had clearly been discussing me, planning how to handle me. What kind of arrangements did you have in mind? Daniel leaned forward, adopting the conciliatory tone he used when smoothing over client concerns. I know this is a shock, but we need to think practically. I'll be supporting Megan and the baby, of course. We'll need to work out a fair division of assets. Fair, I repeated. Each word they spoke dug the knife deeper, revealing how thoroughly they had planned this conversation without me. Daniel loves me, Megan said quietly. We didn't expect this to happen, but now that it has, we want to build a life together. With our son. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Beautiful, accomplished, and 7 months pregnant with my husband's child. The perfect replacement for a wife approaching her late 30s, whose career had taken a back seat to supporting her husband's ambitions. The story was so cliché it was almost boring. Does Jason know? I asked Daniel suddenly. He frowned. Know what? About the creative accounting, the company funds you've been using to finance your affair. That's a mischaracterization, he said stiffly. Any expenses were legitimate business costs. The sapphire necklace was a business expense? Which client received that? Because it certainly wasn't me. Megan's hand flew to her throat, where a delicate silver chain disappeared beneath her sweater. She quickly lowered it, but not before I noticed. I think, I said carefully, rising from my seat, that I need a moment. Excuse me. I walked calmly to our bedroom, closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing the trembling in my limbs that I'd been suppressing. 5 years of marriage, ending in a Thanksgiving dinner disaster worthy of a soap opera. If I didn't laugh, I might never stop crying. But I didn't have time for either reaction. Taking a deep breath, I moved to my closet, unlocked my safe, and removed 2 items. The flash drive from Allison and a thick document folder. Then I returned to the dining room, where Daniel and Megan were having an intense whispered conversation that abruptly ceased when I entered. Sorry for the interruption, I said, retaking my seat. Where were we? Oh yes, discussing arrangements. I placed the folder on the table. Before we go any further, I think we should all refresh our memories about certain legal matters. Daniel's eyes fixed on the folder. What is that? Our prenuptial agreement, I replied, opening it to the section I had carefully bookmarked. Specifically, the infidelity clause. Would you like me to read it aloud, or would you prefer to review it yourself? Rachel? Actually, I'll read it, for Megan's benefit. I cleared my throat. In the event that either party engages in extramarital affairs during the course of the marriage, the non-offending spouse shall be entitled to 70% of all marital assets, plus continued ownership of the primary residence. Furthermore, any children conceived during extramarital affairs shall have no financial claim on family assets, beyond what is legally mandated for basic support. Megan's face drained of color. That can't be legally binding for a child? The child's basic support is protected, I clarified. But trust funds, inheritance, company shares, those are all excluded. This prenup was drafted by one of the top family law attorneys in Colorado and has been reviewed annually since our marriage. It's quite solid. Daniel's expression had turned to stone. You wouldn't do that to an innocent child. I wouldn't, I agreed. But I also didn't sleep with my employee, drain company funds to finance the affair, or plan to ambush my spouse at Thanksgiving dinner. with news of a love child. I closed the folder. Actions have consequences, Daniel. I didn't write that clause. You signed it. Willingly. This is vindictive, Megan interjected, her earlier confidence evaporating. Using a legal technicality to punish a child. I'm not punishing anyone, I cut her off. I'm enforcing an agreement that Daniel entered into freely. The same way he entered into marriage vows, which apparently meant nothing to him. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping. Rachel, be reasonable. We can work this out privately, without lawyers. I'm prepared to be generous. Generous, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. With what? Our shared assets? The company you built while I managed our household and social connections? The home I decorated? I shook my head. No, Daniel. Generosity would have been honesty. Generosity would have been ending our marriage before starting a new family. I slid the flash drive across the table toward him. This contains copies of all the falsified expense reports, personal purchases categorized as business expenses, and hotel bookings paid for through the company. If you're concerned about being generous with our marital assets, perhaps you should worry more about what the company board will think of these creative accounting practices. His face darkened. That's blackmail. No, it's leverage, something you understand quite well. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Now I think it's time for both of you to leave. My family is waiting outside in the cold because you decided Thanksgiving was an appropriate time for this revelation. Megan looked at Daniel uncertainly. What do we do? The question wasn't directed at me, but I answered anyway. You leave. You contact a lawyer, not the company's lawyer, your own lawyer, and you prepare for the reality that your child's father has created. Daniel stood slowly, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. This isn't over, Rachel. Actually, it is, I replied, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Our marriage is over. Your unfettered access to our assets is over. The only thing beginning is the legal process that will formalize what you've already decided through your actions. As they gathered their things, I noticed Megan's hand repeatedly going to her throat, to the necklace hidden beneath her sweater. The sapphire necklace that should have been my birthday present, now adorning the neck of the woman carrying my husband's child. The final insult in an evening full of them. I followed them to the door, maintaining my composure through sheer force of will. Daniel paused at the threshold, turning back to face me. I never meant to hurt you, he said, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I had married. Uncertain, almost vulnerable. But you did, I replied simply. And you planned exactly how to tell me in front of everyone on a holiday. That wasn't an accident, Daniel. That was a calculated move to control the narrative. His momentary vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold mask I had seen increasingly over the past year. Without another word, he guided Megan out the door. And into the snowy evening, I watched through the window as they walked to his car, his hand on the small of her back, an intimate gesture I recognized all too well. Only when their taillights disappeared down the street did I allow my shoulders to slump, the facade of strength momentarily cracking. A gentle hand touched my arm. Emily had come back inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold. They're gone? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Mom Johnson, Jason, and Sophia are in the kitchen, salvaging what they can of dinner. Mark's opening more wine. She squeezed my arm. What do you need, Rach? What did I need? The question seemed simultaneously simple and impossible to answer. I needed the last 6 months back. I needed my marriage to not be a lie. I needed to not be standing in my carefully decorated home on Thanksgiving, having just confronted my husband and his pregnant mistress. Wine, I finally said. Lots of wine. Emily nodded, guiding me toward the kitchen. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, I call Catherine and start divorce proceedings. The kitchen was a flurry of activity when we entered. Linda was aggressively reheating side dishes, her movements sharp with barely contained fury. Jason and Sophia were quietly setting the dining table anew, erasing all evidence of the previous disastrous scene. Mark was indeed opening more wine, lining up bottles like soldiers preparing for battle. "Rachel," Linda said when she saw me, immediately abandoning the sweet potatoes to wrap me in a fierce hug. "I am so sorry. So sorry." The unexpected gentleness nearly broke me. I had always respected Linda, but our relationship had been cordial rather than warm. Now, her maternal embrace offered comfort I hadn't known I needed. "It's not your fault," I managed, pulling back slightly. "You didn't raise him to do this." "No," she agreed, her eyes flashing. "And when I get him alone, I plan to remind him of exactly how he was raised." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. I'd pay to see that conversation. "It's on the house," Linda assured me, returning to her dinner rescue mission with renewed vigor. Jason approached next, his discomfort evident. "Rachel, I had no idea about any of this. The company funds, the situation with Megan, none of it." "I believe you," I said, accepting the glass of wine Mark silently offered. "But you might want to audit those expense reports more carefully going forward." He nodded gravely. First thing Monday morning. We eventually settled back at the dining table, a smaller group now, the empty chairs a stark reminder of the evening's drama. The food was slightly overcooked from reheating, the mood subdued, but there was also an unexpected intimacy to this gathering of allies. "A toast," Emily said, raising her glass. "To Rachel, who just demonstrated more dignity and strength than most people could muster in a lifetime." "To Rachel," they echoed, glasses clinking. I took a sip of wine, the warmth spreading through me a poor substitute for the happiness I had hoped for today, but welcome nonetheless. "Thank you all for staying. I'm sorry the holiday was ruined." "Nonsense," Linda declared, attacking her turkey with surprising ferocity. "The holiday isn't ruined. The marriage is ruined. Important distinction." "Linda," Sophia gasped, but I found myself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in hours. "She's right," I admitted. "The marriage has been ruined for months. I just didn't have confirmation until today." "What will you do?" Jason asked carefully. "About the company, I mean, the prenup." I considered this. Daniel and I had equal shares in Johnson Technology Consulting on paper, though he was the public face while I had taken a background role. "I don't know yet. I need to talk to Catherine, understand my options." I looked directly at Jason. "But I have no intention of destroying what you've both built. That wouldn't serve anyone." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Whatever you decide, you have my support, professionally and personally." The conversation gradually shifted to more mundane topics: Sophia's mother's recent knee surgery, Mark's promotion at work, Emily's plans to renovate their bathroom. Normal, everyday matters that felt surreal against the backdrop of my imploding marriage, but also provided a welcome distraction. By the time we reached dessert, pumpkin pie that had survived the evening's chaos unscathed, I felt a curious sense of clarity emerging from the emotional hurricane. My marriage was over. The life I had carefully constructed with Daniel was ending. But I was still here, surrounded by people who cared about me, protected by my own foresight in insisting on that prenuptial agreement. "Have you thought about where you'll stay tonight?" Emily asked as we began clearing dessert plates. "You're welcome to come home with us. The guest room is already made up." I considered the offer. The thought of sleeping in my bed, our bed, held little appeal. But leaving felt like conceding territory, like admitting defeat. "I appreciate it, but I think I'll stay here tonight," I decided. "This is my home. I'm not being driven out of it." Linda nodded approvingly. "Good girl, stand your ground." "But maybe tomorrow." I looked at my sister. Tomorrow I might take you up on that guest room. Just for a few days, until I get my bearings. Whatever you need, Emily assured me, squeezing my hand. For as long as you need it. After everyone had gone, with hugs, reassurances, and promises to check in the next day, I found myself alone in the silent house. The dining room still bore evidence of our interrupted Thanksgiving. Wine glasses half empty, candles burned. Low, napkins abandoned beside plates. I moved through the rooms methodically, gathering dishes, extinguishing candles, restoring order to the physical space even as my emotional landscape remained in chaos. In the kitchen, I found Megan's sweet potato casserole, still largely untouched. Without hesitation, I dumped the entire dish into the garbage disposal and watched with grim satisfaction as it disappeared. Later, as I lay in bed, on my side, only leaving his untouched as if maintaining this small boundary might protect me, I realized I hadn't cried. Not a single tear through the entire confrontation and its aftermath. The numbness that had sustained me through dinner now gave way to a dull ache spreading through my chest, yet still, no tears came. Instead, I found myself mentally reviewing legal clauses, financial statements, company ownership details. The prenup protected me in ways I hadn't anticipated needing when I insisted upon it years ago. But beyond the legal protection was something less, tangible but equally important. A reminder that I had always been prudent, always looked ahead, always protected myself even when believing I didn't need to. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Daniel. "We need to talk. Privately. Tomorrow." I stared at the message, considering my response. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, to make him wait and wonder. Another part recognized that practical matters would need to be addressed eventually. "Contact my lawyer," I typed finally. "Catherine Mitchell. All communication goes through her from now on." His response came seconds later. "Don't do this, Rachel. We can work something out that benefits everyone." The audacity was almost impressive. Even now, he believed he could negotiate, could find some middle ground that would allow him to have everything he wanted. His pregnant girlfriend, access to our shared assets, perhaps even my continued silence about the misappropriated company. Funds. "The time for negotiation was before you slept with your assistant," I replied. "Before you spent company money on hotels and gifts for her. Before you planned to ambush me with her pregnancy at our Thanksgiving dinner. There's nothing to discuss directly. Catherine's number is in your contacts." I turned off my phone after that, unwilling to allow his responses to penetrate the fragile sense of resolve I had constructed. Tomorrow would bring complicated legal discussions, financial evaluations, and likely the beginning of a messy divorce. But tonight, in this moment, I had done what needed to be done. I had stood my ground, protected my interests, and refused to be manipulated. As I drifted toward an exhausted sleep, one thought provided unexpected comfort. The prenuptial agreement I had insisted upon, the document Daniel had dismissively signed, assuring me we would never need it, would now ensure that his betrayal came with consequences he couldn't charm, negotiate, or lie his way out of. Morning arrived with harsh clarity, winter sunlight reflecting off fresh snow to create a brightness that felt at odds with my emotional state. I had slept fitfully, haunted by fragments of dreams where Daniel and Megan laughed at me across conference tables and restaurant booths. I woke feeling hollow, with the strange sensation that I was observing myself from a distance, watching a woman whose life had dramatically altered in the space of a single evening. The house was preternaturally quiet. No coffee brewing, no shower running, no CNN playing in the background as Daniel checked markets before breakfast. Just silence and stillness, a preview of my new reality. I reached for my phone, powering it on with a sense of dread. Notifications immediately flooded the screen. 5 missed calls and a dozen text messages from Daniel. concerned check-ins from Emily and Olivia, and an early morning email from Catherine acknowledging my voicemail and confirming she would meet me at 11 a.m. I scrolled through Daniel's messages, each growing increasingly desperate. Rachel, please be reasonable. We need to discuss this. Like adults. Think about what you're doing to the company. You're making a mistake. I still care about you. This scorched earth approach helps no one. The final message, sent at 3:17 a.m., simply read, I'm sorry. For everything. Too little. Too late. I forced myself to shower and dress, selecting a tailored navy dress and blazer that had always made me feel confident. Armor for the battle. Ahead. As I applied makeup with mechanical precision, I studied my reflection, searching for visible evidence of the earthquake that had shattered my life. But the woman in the mirror looked remarkably unchanged, perhaps a bit paler, with shadows beneath her eyes, but still recognizably myself. Who was I now, without the identity of Daniel's wife? The question surfaced unexpectedly as I fastened a necklace around my throat. We had been Daniel and Rachel for so long that I had almost forgotten how to be simply Rachel. A marketing executive who had stepped back from her career to support her husband's ambitions. A woman who had channeled her organizational skills and creativity into building the perfect home and social life rather than professional achievements. The realization sent a jolt through me. In prioritizing our marriage, I had put my own ambitions on indefinite hold. I had been so busy creating the perfect environment for Daniel's success that I had neglected to nurture my own. That would need to change. Catherine's office felt like a sanctuary when I arrived precisely at 11 a.m., a space where emotion took a back seat to strategy and legal precedent. Her assistant ushered me straight in, where I found Catherine reviewing documents at her desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Rachel, she said, rising to embrace me briefly before gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I've reviewed everything you sent. Over. First, let me say how sorry I am that you're going through this. Thank you, I replied, setting my purse on the floor beside me. Has Daniel's lawyer contacted you yet? Not yet, though I expect to hear something today. She removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct gaze. Before we get into the legal details, how are you actually doing? The question, asked with genuine concern rather than mere professional courtesy, nearly cracked my composure. I'm functioning, I managed. Still in shock, I think. It doesn't quite feel real. Catherine nodded sympathetically. That's normal. This is fresh trauma, and you're still processing it. I haven't cried, I admitted, the observation sounding strange when voiced aloud. Not once. Is that normal too? Everyone responds differently. Some people shut down emotionally as a protection mechanism. The tears may come later, or they may not. She leaned forward slightly. There's no correct way to feel about betrayal of this magnitude. I appreciated her straightforward acknowledgement of what had happened. Betrayal. Not marital difficulties, or infidelity, or any of the other euphemisms that might have minimized Daniel's actions. So, what happens now? I asked, eager to focus on practical matters. Catherine shifted into professional mode, outlining the process ahead with clinical precision. The filing of divorce papers citing infidelity with documented evidence. The enforcement of the prenuptial agreement's specific clauses. The division of assets according to those terms. The potential complications of the company's involvement, given the misuse of funds. The prenup is very strong, she assured me, tapping a document folder. The infidelity clause is clear, and the evidence you've provided is compelling. Moreover, the financial impropriety creates additional leverage beyond the scope of the prenup itself. Leverage for what? For a swift, clean resolution, Catherine explained. Daniel has significant motivation to settle this quickly and quietly, without involving the company board or potential regulatory scrutiny over misappropriated funds. I nodded, understanding her implication. And the pregnancy? Megan's child? The prenup specifically addresses children from extramarital affairs, she confirmed. While the child will be entitled to basic support as Daniel's biological offspring, the agreement excludes any claim on family assets, trust funds, or inheritance beyond that minimum. Daniel will fight that, I predicted. He'll want to provide for his son, and Megan will certainly push for more. Catherine's expression hardened slightly. He should have considered that before conceiving a child outside his marriage. The prenup is binding, Rachel. He signed it willingly, with full legal counsel. The consequences were clearly outlined. She was right, of course. Daniel had made his choices, repeatedly and deliberately. The fact that those choices now had financial consequences for his new family was not my responsibility to mitigate. What about the company? I asked, turning to perhaps the most complicated aspect of our entanglement. I own 45% of Johnson Technology. You have several options there, Catherine said, opening a different folder. You could maintain your ownership position, becoming a silent partner while Daniel continues day-to-day operations. You could sell your shares back to Daniel at a premium, given the circumstances. Or you could potentially sell to a third party, though there may be contractual limitations on that option. I considered these possibilities. The company had been Daniel's vision initially, but my investment, both financial and supportive, had been instrumental in its success. The thought of remaining connected to him through business ties felt uncomfortable, yet walking away entirely meant surrendering a significant asset I had helped build. I need time to think about that, I said finally. I don't want to make decisions out of anger or revenge that I might regret later. Catherine nodded approvingly. A wise approach. Nothing needs to be decided immediately. For now, let's focus on filing the divorce petition and securing temporary orders regarding access to your home and financial accounts. By the time I left Catherine's office 2 hours later, a clear path forward had emerged from the chaos. Divorce papers would be filed Monday morning. A hearing for temporary orders was already scheduled for the following week. Catherine had initiated the process of freezing certain joint accounts and documenting the current state of our assets to prevent any hasty liquidation or transfers by Daniel. I felt oddly lighter as I walked to my car, as if taking these concrete steps had somehow made the situation more manageable. The future remained uncertain, but it was no longer a formless void of pain and confusion. There were procedures to follow, legal protections to invoke, decisions to make from a position of relative strength rather than vulnerability. My phone rang as I slid into the driver's seat. Olivia's name flashed on the screen. Hey, I answered, realizing it was the first time I'd spoken to her since everything had imploded. Oh my God, Rachel, she breathed. Emily called me last night. Are you okay? Where are you? Do you need anything? The rapid-fire concern in her voice brought a small smile to my lips despite everything. I just left Catherine's office. I'm filing for divorce on Monday. Good, she said firmly. That bastard doesn't deserve another minute of your time. I can't believe he brought her to Thanksgiving dinner. Who does that? Someone who wanted to control the narrative, I replied, insights from my meeting with Catherine still fresh. He thought a public setting would limit my reaction, force me to be civilized. Well, that backfired spectacularly, Olivia observed. Emily said you were incredible, that you pulled out the prenup like a gunslinger in an old western. The weeks following Thanksgiving unfolded with clinical precision, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos I had expected. Catherine moved with ruthless efficiency, filing divorce papers first thing Monday morning and securing an emergency hearing for temporary orders by Wednesday. Daniel's lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Thomas Brennan, who was clearly out of his depth in family court, had barely managed to file a response before we were standing before Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Your Honor, Catherine began, her voice steady and authoritative in the wood-paneled courtroom, we're requesting temporary exclusive use of the marital residence for my client, as well as a freeze on all joint accounts and marital assets pending full financial disclosure. Thomas Brennan rose to object, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair practically screaming corporate law rather than domestic relations. Your Honor, Mr. Johnson requires access to those accounts to maintain his business operations. Johnson, Technology Consulting employs 37 people who depend on the company's continued financial stability. Judge Harmon peered at him over her reading glasses. The company has its own accounts, does it not, Mr. Brennan? I'm referring specifically to personal assets. The lines between personal and business finances are somewhat blurred in entrepreneurial ventures, Your Honor, Brennan attempted. Catherine pounced immediately. That blurring is precisely our concern, Your Honor. We have documentation showing Mr. Johnson has already been inappropriately using company funds for personal expenses related to his extramarital affair. The row. Judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that so? Mr. Brennan, does your client dispute these allegations? Brennan conferred briefly with Daniel, who sat stiffly beside him in a charcoal suit that I recognized as one I had selected during our last shopping trip together. The irony wasn't lost on me. My client acknowledges some personal expenses may have been incorrectly categorized, Your Honor, but disputes the characterization of systematic misuse. Regardless, those are company matters that fall outside the scope of these divorce proceedings. Judge Harmon didn't appear convinced. On the contrary, Mr. Brennan, if marital assets were used to finance extramarital activities, that is very much within the scope of these proceedings. She turned to Catherine. Ms. Mitchell, you mentioned documentation? Catherine produced a folder containing the key evidence from Allison's flash drive, hotel receipts, dinner reservations, the infamous sapphire necklace purchase. As the judge reviewed these materials, I watched Daniel from across the courtroom. His jaw was clenched, a small muscle twitching near his temple, a tell I had learned to recognize during our marriage. He was furious but trying to maintain composure. Judge Harmon handed the folder back to her clerk, her expression unchanged, but for a slight tightening around her mouth. I'm granting the temporary orders as requested. Mrs. Johnson will have exclusive use of the marital residence. Joint accounts will be frozen except for a $5,000 transfer to separate accounts for each party to cover immediate living expenses. Mr. Johnson is to provide a full accounting of all financial holdings, both personal and business-related, within 7 days. She fixed Daniel with a pointed look. And Mr. Johnson, I strongly advise against any further blurring of business and personal expenses while these proceedings are ongoing. This court takes a dim view of such practices. With a final rap of her gavel, it was done. In the span of 20 minutes, I had secured my home, protected our joint assets, and seen the first official acknowledgement of Daniel's betrayal entered into legal record. The relief was so profound I nearly sagged against Catherine's side as we gathered our materials. Don't look at him, Catherine murmured as we prepared to leave. Walk straight out with your head high. I followed her instruction, focusing on the wooden doors at the back of the courtroom rather than Daniel's burning gaze. Only once we were safely in the hallway did Catherine allow a small smile to cross her features. That went as well as we could have hoped, she said, guiding me toward the elevators. Judge Harmon is known for being fair but traditionalist in her values. The evidence of financial impropriety on top of the infidelity clearly didn't sit well with her. What happens now? I asked, still processing the rapid turn of events. Now we prepare for discovery, Catherine explained as we descended to the lobby. Financial disclosures, depositions, the full accounting of assets and liabilities. It's going to get detailed and potentially unpleasant. Daniel will likely try to protect certain assets or argue for different valuations. And Megan? The baby? Catherine's expression turned contemplative. That's where things may get complicated. The prenup language regarding children from affairs is strong, but Daniel may try to challenge it, arguing it's contrary to public policy or the best interests of the child. Will that work? It's unlikely, but not impossible, she admitted. Judges have significant discretion in family law matters, especially where children are concerned. But the fact that this is a prenatal situation rather than an existing child works in our favor. The court typically gives more weight to agreements made before a child's conception. As we exited the courthouse into the crisp December air, I felt a curious blend of emotions, vindication mixed with a profound sadness for what might have been. The legal machinery was now in motion, formally dismantling the life I had spent 5 years building. However justified, there was an undeniable finality to it that caught in my throat like a physical object. "Rachel!" Daniel's voice cut through my thoughts. He was striding across the courthouse plaza, Thomas Brennan hurrying to keep pace behind him. Catherine immediately stepped slightly in front of me, a protective gesture I appreciated. "Mr. Johnson, any communication should go through counsel," she said coolly. Daniel ignored her, his attention fixed entirely on me. "Rachel, this is ridiculous. We need to talk directly, not through lawyers and judges." "That opportunity passed when you decided to impregnate your assistant," I replied, surprising myself with my steady tone. His face darkened. "You're being vindictive. The company, our home, you're trying to take everything we built together." "Actually, I'm simply enforcing the agreement you signed," I corrected him. "The same agreement you apparently forgot about, while booking hotel rooms on the company credit card." Thomas Brennan finally caught up, placing a restraining hand on Daniel's arm. "Daniel, this isn't productive. Ms. Mitchell is right. All communication should go through proper channels now." Daniel shrugged off his lawyer's hand but seemed to regain some control. "Fine, but know this, Rachel. You're making enemies you can't afford. The board, our investors, they won't appreciate being dragged into this mess." It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. He was reminding me of his connections, his position in the business community we had both cultivated. Over years, Catherine began to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Are you threatening me, Daniel?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "Because that would be extremely unwise at this juncture. I haven't shown the board or investors a single document. Yet, I've been discreet despite your public humiliation of me at Thanksgiving. But if you want to escalate this beyond a private legal matter, I have a flash drive full of reasons why that's a terrible idea for you." His expression faltered, the confident mask slipping to reveal uncertainty beneath. For perhaps the first time, he was realizing that I held genuine power in this situation, that his actions had created vulnerabilities he couldn't easily dismiss or charm away. "This isn't you," he said finally, his voice lower. "You're not vindictive or cruel. This is Catherine turning you into something you're not." The attempted manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "No, Daniel, this is me protecting myself because you chose not to. This is me enforcing boundaries because you violated them repeatedly. This is me being exactly who I've always been. The woman careful enough to insist on a prenup even while believing in our marriage." Catherine touched my elbow gently. "We should go, Rachel. This conversation isn't beneficial to anyone." With a final nod to Daniel and his increasingly uncomfortable-looking attorney, I turned and walked away. Catherine's steady presence beside me like a shield against the emotional turmoil threatening to break through my carefully maintained composure. "That was well handled," she said once we reached her car. "But try to avoid direct confrontations if possible. Everything you say can potentially be used against you." "I understand," I agreed, buckling my seatbelt. "It won't happen again." But as we drove away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of Daniel still standing on the plaza, watching our departure with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember the man I had married. His enthusiasm when describing a new business idea, his tenderness during quiet moments, his genuine delight in surprising me with small, thoughtful gifts. When had that man begun to disappear? Or had he ever truly existed at all? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal procedures and practical adjustments to my new reality. I moved temporarily into Emily's guest room, despite having legal rights to our home. The thought of sleeping in that house, surrounded by memories and carefully chosen furnishings that now felt like props from a staged life, was too painful to contemplate. "You can stay as long as you need," Emily insisted, helping me arrange my hastily packed belongings in her spare room. "Mark and I are happy to have you." The generosity of my sister and her husband provided a safe harbor during the storm, but I was acutely aware of imposing on their lives, their routines, their private spaces. I needed to establish my own independence, to build something separate from both my marriage and my family's protection. Catherine connected me with a real estate agent who specialized in discreet, short-term luxury rentals. By mid-December, I had secured a furnished apartment in downtown Denver, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering mountain views and no memories attached to any corner or surface. The 6-month lease would give me time to decide on more permanent arrangements while the divorce proceedings unfolded. "It's perfect," Olivia declared during her first visit, spinning slowly in the center of the open-concept living area. "Completely different from your style with Daniel. A fresh aesthetic for your fresh start." She was right. I had deliberately chosen something that bore no resemblance to the warm, traditional decor of our Cherry Creek home. The apartment's minimalist design, with its clean lines and monochromatic color scheme, represented a blank canvas, both literally and metaphorically. While establishing my new living situation, I also began reconstructing my professional identity. Years of supporting Daniel's career had left my own resume with a significant gap, but my marketing expertise remained valuable. I reached out to former colleagues and clients, updating my LinkedIn profile and scheduling coffee meetings to explore opportunities. "You should consider consulting," suggested Elaine Warner, my former boss at the marketing firm where I'd worked. Before marriage. We were sharing lunch at a cafe near her office, reconnecting after nearly 3 years. "The flexibility would be ideal while you're navigating the divorce, and your experience with high-net-worth client relations is still relevant." The suggestion resonated immediately. Consulting would allow me to rebuild my professional reputation at my own pace, without the constraints of a traditional employment structure. By the time our lunch ended, Elaine had promised to refer 2 potential clients my way. Small projects to start, but with the potential for growth. "Your timing is actually perfect," she added as we prepared to leave. "Year-end means new budgets in J at this juncture. I haven't shown the board or investors a single document yet. I've been discreet, despite your public humiliation of me, at Thanksgiving. But if you want to escalate this beyond a private legal matter, I have a flash drive full of reasons why that's a terrible idea for you." His expression faltered, the confident mask slipping to reveal uncertainty beneath. For perhaps the first time, he was realizing that I held genuine power in this situation, that his actions had created vulnerabilities he couldn't easily dismiss or charm away. "This isn't you," he said finally, his voice lower. "You're not vindictive or cruel. This is Catherine turning you into something you're not." The attempted manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. "No, Daniel. This is me protecting myself because you chose not to. This is me enforcing boundaries because you violated them repeatedly. This is me being exactly who I've always been. The woman careful enough to insist on a prenup even while believing in our marriage." Catherine touched my elbow gently. "We should go, Rachel. This conversation isn't beneficial to anyone." With a final nod to Daniel and his increasingly uncomfortable-looking attorney, I turned and walked away, Catherine's steady presence beside me like a shield against the emotional turmoil threatening to break through my carefully maintained composure. "That was well handled," she said once we reached her car. "But try to avoid direct confrontations if possible. Everything you say can potentially be used against you." "I understand," I agreed, buckling my seatbelt. "It won't happen again." But as we drove away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of Daniel still standing on the plaza, watching our departure with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember the man I had married. His enthusiasm when describing a new business idea, his tenderness during quiet moments, his genuine delight in surprising me with small, thoughtful gifts. When had that man begun to disappear? Or had he ever truly existed at all? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal procedures and practical adjustments to my new reality. I moved temporarily into Emily's guest room, despite having legal rights to our home. The thought of sleeping in that house, surrounded by memories and carefully chosen furnishings that now felt like props from a staged life, was too painful to contemplate. "You can stay as long as you need," Emily insisted, helping me arrange my hastily packed belongings in her spare room. "Mark and I are happy to have you." The generosity of my sister and her husband provided a safe harbor during the storm, but I was acutely aware of imposing on their lives, their routines, their private spaces. I needed to establish my own independence, to build something separate from both my marriage and my family's protection. Catherine connected me with a real estate agent who specialized in discreet, short-term luxury rentals. By mid-December, I had secured a furnished apartment in downtown Denver, a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering mountain views and no memories attached to any corner or surface. The 6-month lease would give me time to decide on more permanent arrangements while the divorce proceedings unfolded. "It's perfect," Olivia declared during her first visit, spinning slowly in the center of the open-concept living area. "Completely. Different from your style with Daniel. A fresh aesthetic for your fresh start." She was right. I had deliberately chosen something that bore no resemblance to the warm, traditional decor of our Cherry Creek home. The apartment's minimalist design, with its clean lines and monochromatic color scheme, represented a blank canvas, both literally and metaphorically. While establishing my new living situation, I also began reconstructing my professional identity. Years of supporting Daniel's career had left my own resume with a significant gap, but my marketing expertise remained valuable. I reached out to former colleagues and clients, updating my LinkedIn profile and scheduling coffee meetings to explore opportunities. "You should consider consulting," suggested Elaine Warner, my former boss at the marketing firm where I'd worked before marriage. We were sharing lunch at a cafe near her office, reconnecting after nearly 3 years. "The flexibility would be ideal while you're navigating the divorce, and your experience with high-net-worth client relations is still relevant." The suggestion resonated immediately. Consulting would allow me to rebuild my professional reputation at my own pace, without the constraints of a traditional employment structure. By the time our lunch ended, Elaine had promised to refer 2 potential clients my way. Small projects to start, but with the potential for growth. "Your timing is actually perfect," she added as we prepared to leave. "Year-end means new budgets. In January. Companies will be looking for fresh marketing perspectives." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt a genuine spark of excitement about the future. Not just survival or damage control, but actual possibilities for growth and renewal. The feeling was fragile, easily overshadowed by waves of grief or anger that still ambushed me at unexpected moments, but its presence gave me hope that healing might eventually be possible. That hope was tested severely the following week when Catherine called with an update on the case. Her voice held an unusual tension that immediately put me on alert. "Daniel's legal team has filed their response to our petition," she began without preamble. They're challenging the prenuptial agreement on several grounds, including unconscionability and duress. That's ridiculous, I protested, pacing my new living room. Daniel had his own attorney review everything. He signed willingly. I know, Catherine assured me. These are standard tactics in high-asset divorces with prenups. They rarely succeed, especially with agreements as carefully drafted as yours. But there's something else, Rachel. She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. They've included a personal affidavit from Daniel claiming that you had an affair early in your marriage which would trigger the same infidelity clause against you. I stopped pacing, frozen in disbelief. What? That's a complete fabrication. I know, Catherine interrupted gently. But we need to address it formally. They're claiming you had a relationship with someone named James Everett in 2019. Does that name mean anything to you? My mind raced through acquaintances and business contacts before landing on the memory. James was a client at my old firm. We worked on a rebranding campaign together before I left. There was nothing remotely romantic between us. Were there any interactions Daniel might misconstrue? Dinners, late meetings, text exchanges? I thought carefully, trying to recall details from 3 years earlier. We had a few team dinners with the entire marketing department present. And yes, occasionally we communicated directly about the project. But everything was strictly professional. Would anyone from that time period verify that? Former colleagues who observed your interactions? Of course. Elaine Warner supervised the entire account. She would confirm everything was appropriate. A horrible thought suddenly occurred to me. Catherine, do you think Daniel was already involved with Megan when he made these allegations? Is he projecting his own behavior onto me? It's possible, she acknowledged. This could be an attempt to neutralize the impact of his affair by creating a parallel narrative where you both violated the marriage. It's actually quite common in these situations. The calculated nature of the accusation felt like a fresh betrayal. Daniel knew me, knew my values, my integrity, my fundamental honesty. To deliberately fabricate an affair, potentially damaging, my reputation and credibility represented a new low I hadn't believed him capable of reaching. How do we fight this? I asked, anger crystallizing into determination. We gather evidence and testimony refuting the claim, Catherine replied. Matter-of-factly, colleagues who can speak to the professional nature of your relationship with this James person, documentation showing your whereabouts during times Daniel may claim you were with him, character witnesses who can attest to your fidelity and honesty. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we proceed with discovery as planned. The financial disclosures are still due next week. This new claim doesn't change our fundamental strategy, Rachel. It's a desperate tactic that will ultimately fail because it's not based in truth. After ending the call, I stood at my apartment window, gazing out at the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Their immovable presence had always provided a sense of perspective, a reminder that human problems were tiny against the backdrop of geological time. But today, even that magnificent vista couldn't diminish the acid burn of this new betrayal. Daniel wasn't just fighting for financial advantage anymore. He was attacking my character, my reputation, the very essence of who I was. The man who had once promised to protect and cherish me was now fabricating lies designed to harm me as deeply as possible. I reached for my phone and called Elaine immediately, explaining the situation without minimizing its seriousness. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. "That's absolute nonsense," she declared forcefully. "I supervised that entire account personally. Your interactions with James were completely professional. In fact, I remember thinking he was a bit intimidated by you after that presentation where you thoroughly dismantled his initial concept." The memory brought a small smile to my lips despite everything. The nautical theme for a tech security company. God, that was terrible. Exactly, and I'll sign whatever affidavit your lawyer needs confirming that. In fact, I'm still in touch with Martina from the creative team who worked directly with you on that account. She'd corroborate everything, too. By the time we ended the call, Elaine had promised to gather statements from 3 former colleagues who had directly witnessed my professional relationship with James. The swift support was heartening, a reminder that I had allies beyond family and close friends, people who knew my character and were willing to defend it. Still, the damage was done in other ways. Daniel's willingness to fabricate an affair revealed a capacity for cruelty I hadn't fully appreciated. The man I thought I knew would never have stooped to such tactics, which meant either I had never truly known him, or he had changed so fundamentally that the person I married no longer existed. Neither possibility offered much comfort. The following day brought another unexpected development. As I was leaving a coffee meeting with a potential client, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rachel, it's Megan. I think we should talk. Alone." I stared at the message, a surge of emotions ranging from anger to curiosity washing over me. What could Daniel's pregnant assistant possibly have to say that would interest me? Was this another coordinated attack, an attempt to gather information or manipulate me further? After several minutes of deliberation, I responded simply, "Why?" Her reply came quickly, "Because there are things you should know that Daniel isn't telling either of us. Please, just coffee in public." Against my better judgment, and what would certainly be Catherine's advice, I found myself agreeing to meet Megan the following afternoon at a busy cafe in the Cherry Creek shopping district. I chose the location deliberately, public enough to discourage dramatic scenes, but far enough from Daniel's usual haunts to minimize the chance of accidental encounters. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street beyond. The tactical considerations felt strange, planning meeting locations as if preparing for covert operations rather than simple conversation. But nothing about my life felt normal anymore. Megan arrived precisely on time, her pregnancy now even more pronounced than it had been at Thanksgiving. 7.5 months along, by my calculation. She spotted me immediately, navigating between tables with one hand resting protectively on her belly. Despite everything, I couldn't help noticing how she glowed with that particular radiance unique to expectant mothers. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, lowering herself carefully into the chair across from mine. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not sure why I did," I replied honestly. "What is it you think I should know, Megan?" She ordered herbal tea when the server approached, waiting until he had moved away before speaking again. "First, I want to apologize for Thanksgiving. I truly believed you knew about the pregnancy, that Daniel had discussed everything with you. I would never have come otherwise." The apology seemed genuine, but it addressed only the smallest fraction of her transgressions against me. "You believed I knew my husband had impregnated his assistant and was planning to leave me, and that I had magnanimously invited you to Thanksgiving dinner to announce it to our family and friends?" Put that way, the absurdity was glaring. Megan had the grace to look genuinely uncomfortable. "When you phrase it like that, no, it doesn't make sense. But Daniel can be very convincing." She cradled her tea mug between her palms. "He told me your marriage had been effectively over for years, that you stayed together for appearances and business advantages. He said you had an arrangement." I laughed without humor. "An arrangement? How convenient for him to invent." "I know that now," she acknowledged, her expression pained. "But at the time, I believed him. I wanted to believe him." "Why are you telling me this? What do you want, Megan? My blessing? Forgiveness?" She shook her head. "Neither. Those aren't mine to ask for. I'm here because Daniel isn't being honest with either of us, and I thought you deserved to know. This piqued my interest despite my skepticism. Go on." After Thanksgiving, After you revealed the prenup clause about children from affairs, Daniel assured me it wouldn't matter. He said his lawyers would easily overturn it, that he had leverage over you because of your own alleged affair. She met my eyes directly. He mentioned someone named James, said he had proof. The fabricated affair accusation had made its way to Megan too. Interesting that Daniel was using the same lie on both fronts. There was no affair, I stated flatly. James was a client at my former marketing firm. Daniel is lying to both of us. Megan nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. I thought as much. He's been different since Thanksgiving. Secretive. Controlling. When I asked, to see this supposed evidence, he became angry, told me to focus on the baby and let him handle the legal matters. Why would you doubt him now after believing everything else he told you? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. She sighed, absently rubbing her rounded belly. Because I found something on his laptop. He left it open while taking a call. In another room. There was an email draft to someone named Thomas, his lawyer, I assume. My interest sharpened. What did it say? It outlined a strategy for countering your divorce filing. It mentioned creating alternative narratives to neutralize the infidelity clause. There was a line that said, "We need something that appears credible even without substantive evidence." Megan's voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. He was deliberately fabricating an affair to use against you. And when I confronted him about it, he dismissed my concerns, said it was standard legal strategy, that everyone does it in high-stakes divorces. I absorbed this information silently. While it confirmed what Catherine and I had already suspected, having direct confirmation from Megan was valuable, potentially even legally significant. Why tell me this? You're carrying his child. Your financial future is tied to his. Megan's expression hardened slightly. Because I'm beginning to understand what kind of man he actually is. Because fabricating evidence and perjuring himself suggests a character I don't want influencing my son. And because, she hesitated, I'm starting to question everything he told me about you, about your marriage, about his intentions toward me and the baby. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or deceit. But all I saw was a pregnant woman grappling with painful realizations about the father of her child, a position I couldn't help but empathize with despite being on opposite sides of the situation. What exactly are you asking from me, Megan? Nothing specific, she replied. I just thought you should know what he's doing, and… She paused, seemingly gathering courage. I wanted to ask if the prenup clause about children from affairs is as ironclad as you suggested. Not for my sake, but for my son's. The question surprised me with its directness. Catherine, my lawyer, believes it's very strong. The fact that the pregnancy occurred during our marriage makes it particularly applicable. Megan nodded slowly, absorbing this. I see. But, I continued, surprising myself, the clause primarily affects inheritance and trust fund access, not basic support. Your son would still receive child support consistent with Daniel's income level. That's clarifying. Thank you. She took a sip of her tea, wincing slightly as she shifted position. He hasn't been forthcoming about any of the financial aspects. When I ask, he says everything will be taken care of, that I shouldn't worry. An uncomfortable parallel struck me, how similar her current experience was to patterns in my own marriage. Daniel making financial decisions unilaterally. Daniel providing reassurance without transparency. Daniel expecting trust without accountability. If I can offer one piece of advice, I said, the words emerging before I had fully formed the thought. Get your own lawyer, not someone Daniel selects or pays for. Someone who represents only your interests and your child's. Megan looked genuinely surprised at this suggestion coming from me. You would advise that, even though it might complicate your own case? This isn't about winning or punishing anymore. I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. It's about establishing clarity and fairness. Daniel has demonstrated he's willing to lie to protect his interests. You need someone advocating specifically for you. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering unexpected territory. Megan shared more details about how her relationship with Daniel had evolved, beginning professionally, but gradually crossing boundaries during late nights at the office and business trips. I found myself oddly detached listening to these details, as if she were describing characters in a film rather than my actual husband and the collapse of my marriage. As we prepared to leave, Megan hesitated, her hand again resting on her belly. There's one more thing you should know. The company's financial situation isn't as solid as Daniel portrays publicly. There have been cash flow problems for months. He's been keeping it from the board, using creative accounting to maintain appearances. This was new and potentially significant information. How do you know this? I've been handling his correspondence, including some communications with creditors. And I overheard him arguing with Jason about taking on debt to cover operating expenses. She met my gaze directly. If I were you, with a significant ownership stake, I'd look into this before agreeing to any settlement involving company shares. With that final revelation, we parted ways, unlikely allies connected by the same man's deceptions. As I watched Megan's retreating figure, her pregnancy now so visible she had developed the distinctive waddle of late-term expectancy, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger and betrayal remained, but they were now complemented by something unexpected. A grudging respect for her willingness to share information that served my interests potentially at the expense of her own. I immediately called Catherine to relay the conversation, particularly the revelation about the company's financial struggles. This is significant, Catherine agreed. If Daniel is concealing financial difficulties while trying to minimize your ownership value in settlement negotiations, that's highly problematic from a legal standpoint. Can we use Megan's information directly? Not without her willingness to provide formal testimony, which might be unlikely given her complicated position. But it gives us direction for our financial discovery. We'll request specific categories of documents, creditor communications, internal cash flow reports, loan applications. If there's fire behind this smoke, we'll find it. The call with Catherine left me energized in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, I had been reacting to Daniel's actions, responding to his legal maneuvers, defending against his fabricated accusations. Now, finally, I had information that allowed me to take proactive steps. That evening, as I sat in my minimalist apartment watching snow fall gently over the Denver skyline, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The pain of Daniel's betrayal hadn't diminished, but its power over me had. I was no longer simply the wronged wife fighting for her fair share. I was a woman strategically rebuilding her life, making careful decisions based on facts rather than emotions. The prenup that had once seemed like a cold, business-like formality inserted into our romance had become my shield and sword in this unwanted battle. But beyond its legal protections, it represented something more significant. My own foresight and self-protection, my unwillingness to surrender my autonomy even in the heady days of new love. That same instinct for self-preservation would guide me forward now, through whatever challenges the divorce proceedings might still bring. Daniel had underestimated me once, assuming I would crumble under the public humiliation of his pregnant assistant's appearance at our Thanksgiving dinner. He wouldn't make that mistake again, not after I had revealed the prenup clause that would reshape his financial future as dramatically as his choices had reshaped my personal one. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "We need to talk about the company. Important development. Can we meet without lawyers?" I studied the message, noting its deliberate vagueness and the urgency it attempted to convey. 2 months ago, I would have responded immediately, rearranging my schedule to accommodate what Daniel deemed important. Now I simply switched off my phone without replying. Whatever corporate crisis he was facing would still be there in the morning, after I'd consulted with Catherine and decided how, or whether, to engage. The prenup had given me more than legal protection. It had given me the power to set my own pace, to establish my own priorities, to reclaim my time and attention from the man who had taken them for granted for too long. Whether Daniel's text represented a genuine business concern or another manipulation attempt, my response would be measured and strategic, not emotional or reactive. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I fell asleep without the weight of uncertainty pressing on my chest. Whatever came next, I would face it from a position of strength, armed with legal protections, professional support, and most importantly, a renewed confidence in my own judgment. The prenup clause that Daniel had dismissed years earlier as an unnecessary formality had become the foundation upon which I would rebuild my life, one careful decision at a time. January in Denver arrived with brutal cold and startling clarity. While the mountains disappeared behind curtains of snow, my path forward became increasingly defined. Catherine's team had uncovered exactly what Megan hinted at. Johnson Technology was facing significant financial challenges, masked by creative accounting and Daniel's relentless optimism in communications with the board. The East Coast expansion was premature, Catherine explained, spreading financial documents across her desk during our morning meeting. They secured clients, but at razor-thin margins that aren't covering the additional overhead. They've been operating at a loss for nearly 6 months. I studied the cash flow projections, recognizing Daniel's familiar pattern of ambitious growth over sustainable profit. Has Jason seen these figures? Presumably as co-founder, but the board has received more. Selective information. Catherine pointed to a presentation dated 2 months earlier. Compare the projections shown here with the actual numbers. The discrepancy was substantial. Projected revenue growth of 22% against actual growth of barely 4%, with expenses significantly exceeding budget in nearly every category. This is more than optimistic forecasting, I observed. It's deliberate misrepresentation. Catherine nodded grimly, which creates both challenges and opportunities for your position. The company value is likely lower than initial assessments, potentially reducing your settlement. However, Daniel's fiduciary misrepresentations give us significant leverage. How so? The board would be very interested in these discrepancies, as would the company's investors. Daniel knows this, which means he has strong motivation to settle quickly and quietly rather than risk exposure through prolonged litigation. I absorbed this information, mentally recalibrating my expectations and strategy. What's our next move? We've requested a settlement conference, Catherine replied. Given these findings, I believe Daniel's team will be eager to negotiate, rather than proceed to trial. The question becomes what terms we're willing to accept. That question lingered as I left Catherine's office and headed to the small co-working space I'd rented downtown. The temporary office provided a professional environment for meeting potential clients, 3 of whom had already signed contracts for marketing consultation. My career resurrection was progressing faster than anticipated, bringing not just income, but a renewed sense of purpose and identity beyond Daniel Johnson's wife. As I settled at my desk, my phone lit up with a text from Olivia. Lunch today? Big news to share. We met at an upscale sushi restaurant near her design studio, where Olivia could barely contain her excitement long enough to order. Mark proposed, she finally burst out, extending her left hand to display a vintage emerald ring. Last night at Barolo Grill, complete surprise. Olivia, that's wonderful, I exclaimed, genuinely delighted for my friend and her boyfriend. Of 3 years. The ring is stunning. Absolutely perfect for you. I know, right? He remembered I once mentioned loving my grandmother's emerald brooch. Her expression softened. Rachel, I wasn't sure if this would be difficult for you, with everything going on. I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Don't be ridiculous. I couldn't be happier for you. Your happiness doesn't diminish because my marriage failed. Failed is an interesting word choice, Olivia observed, studying me, as if you had equal responsibility for its collapse. The observation caught me off guard. What would you call it? Sabotaged, destroyed, betrayed. She ticked off alternatives on her fingers. Words that accurately place responsibility where it belongs, with Daniel. I considered this as our food arrived. Maybe you're right. But focusing on blame doesn't help me move forward. It keeps me tethered to him emotionally. Olivia nodded, accepting my perspective even if she didn't fully agree. Speaking of moving forward, any more developments with the divorce? I filled her in on the company's financial situation and the upcoming settlement conference. Careful to include only details Catherine had cleared for sharing. Olivia listened attentively, her designer's mind visibly mapping connections and implications. So his options are essentially settle generously with you or risk the board discovering his financial shell game, she summarized. No wonder he's been texting you directly. He's desperate to control the narrative. Exactly. But Catherine warned me not to engage outside official channels. She says Daniel will try to manipulate any direct communication. Smart woman, Olivia agreed, dipping a piece of sashimi in soy sauce. Though I'm curious what his angle would be. What could he possibly offer that would make you consider protecting him from the consequences of his own actions? I shrugged. That's what I can't figure out. With the prenup's infidelity clause and the financial evidence we've gathered, his position is fundamentally weak. Catherine says his only remaining leverage is my desire for a quick, clean resolution versus a messy public battle. Is that accurate? Would you sacrifice financial advantage to avoid prolonged conflict? The question deserved careful consideration. Not financial advantage, no. But I would consider reasonable terms that provide clean separation without unnecessary publicity or business disruption. My goal isn't to destroy Daniel or the company, just to secure what's fairly mine and move on with my life. Olivia studied me thoughtfully. That's incredibly healthy. I'm not sure I could be so measured if Mark did something similar. Trust me, I've had my vengeful fantasies, I admitted with a small smile. But acting on them would only keep me emotionally entangled with Daniel longer. I want freedom more than vengeance. As lunch concluded and we prepared to part ways, Olivia hugged me tightly. I'm officially asking you to be my maid of honor, she whispered. We're thinking September. Please say you'll do it. The invitation touched me deeply, a reminder that life continued, that celebrations and milestones awaited on the other side of this difficult passage. I'd be honored, I replied, meaning it completely. Walking back to my co-working space through the crisp winter air, I reflected on how differently I viewed my situation compared to just a month earlier. The initial shock and betrayal remained painful, but they no longer defined me. Every step I took, professionally, legally, personally, created distance between the devastated woman at that Thanksgiving table and the increasingly confident person I was becoming. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week in a neutral conference room at the downtown Marriott. Catherine arrived with 2 associates and a financial analyst, their collective preparedness evident. In the wheeled document cases and organized binders they efficiently arranged on our side of the conference table. Daniel entered with Thomas Brennan and an older attorney I didn't recognize, along with what appeared to be their own financial expert. Daniel himself looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, with new lines etched around his mouth and dark circles beneath his eyes. The impeccable grooming that had once seemed effortless now appeared deliberately maintained against encroaching dishevelment. Our eyes met briefly across the table before I deliberately shifted my attention to Catherine's opening remarks. focusing on her clear articulation of our position rather than Daniel's attempt at silent communication. Before we begin, Catherine stated calmly, I want to clarify that my client's primary objective is a fair and final resolution that honors the prenuptial agreement both parties signed voluntarily. We believe the terms of that agreement, particularly given Mr. Johnson's documented infidelity, provide a clear framework for division of assets. Thomas Brennan leaned forward, his corporate polish slightly frayed at the edges. We maintain that certain provisions of the prenuptial agreement are unconscionable and potentially unenforceable, particularly regarding the unborn child's interests. A position with minimal legal support, Catherine countered smoothly. But perhaps more relevant to today's discussion are the company financial documents we've analyzed, which suggest significant discrepancies between representations to the board and actual performance metrics. The older attorney, who introduced himself as Warren Phillips, raised a hand. Those financial matters aren't directly relevant to the divorce settlement except as they affect company valuation. On the contrary, Catherine replied, sliding copies of a document across the table. As outlined in this brief, Mr. Johnson's fiduciary responsibilities as CEO and his representations to the board create potential liability issues that directly impact both parties' interests in the company. Mrs. Johnson has no desire to see the company destabilized, but these matters cannot be separated from settlement considerations. The strategic brilliance of Catherine's approach became immediately apparent. By linking the financial misrepresentations to the settlement negotiations, she had effectively created leverage without explicitly threatening to expose Daniel to the board. The implication was clear. A generous settlement might encourage discretion regarding these findings. Phillips and Brennan conferred quietly before Phillips addressed the room again. Given these complex considerations, perhaps it would be beneficial for the principals to speak privately while legal teams prepare initial settlement frameworks. Catherine turned to me, eyebrows raised in silent question. We had discussed this possibility in advance. Daniel would likely seek direct communication, hoping to leverage our personal history and emotional connection. I'm willing to speak with Mr. Johnson briefly, I agreed, maintaining formal language, but any substantive agreements will require counsel review. We were directed to a smaller adjacent conference room, its panoramic windows overlooking snow-covered mountains. Beyond the city skyline, Daniel closed the door behind us, maintaining a careful distance as if unsure of his welcome in my personal space. You look well, he offered, his voice softer than during the formal proceedings. Thank you. I kept my response neutral, neither encouraging nor discouraging personal conversation. Catherine indicated you wanted to discuss settlement parameters directly. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that once would have prompted me to smooth it back into place. Rachel, we both know this posturing through attorneys is unnecessary. We built a life together for 5 years. Surely we can find a reasonable resolution without financial warfare. I agree completely, I replied, surprising him with my calm acquiescence. A reasonable resolution would be full enforcement of the prenuptial agreement we both signed, with fair valuation of all assets including your company. His expression tightened. The company situation is complicated. Yes, I've seen the financial reports. The East Coast expansion is significantly underperforming projections. The new client acquisition costs exceed revenue generation. The debt-to-income ratio has reached potentially unsustainable levels. I listed these facts without emotion, watching recognition dawn in his eyes. Your complicated situation is well documented in our discovery materials, Daniel. He moved to the window, gazing out at the mountains as if seeking perspective or escape. The company can recover with the right strategy and sufficient operating capital, but a costly divorce settlement could jeopardize that recovery, potentially reducing value for both of us. Perhaps you should have considered that before using company funds to finance your affair, I observed. Or before impregnating your assistant. Or before attempting to ambush me with both revelations at Thanksgiving dinner. Daniel turned back to me, genuine remorse flickering across his features. I handled everything terribly. I know that. But punishing me financially won't undo the past. This isn't punishment, Daniel. It's consequence. The prenup established clear terms for exactly this scenario. I maintained steady eye contact. Did you think I wouldn't enforce it? That I'd be too devastated or intimidated to hold you accountable? I thought. He hesitated. I thought you'd consider our history, the years we built together. I thought you'd want to preserve the company's future for both our sakes. For the first time, I allowed myself a small, sad smile. That was your fundamental miscalculation. You believed I would prioritize your interests, or even our shared financial interests, over my dignity and self-respect. You never understood that the money was always secondary to me. Then what do you want? He asked, frustration evident in his tone. If not financial advantage, what are you seeking? Exactly what Catherine stated. A fair and final resolution based on the agreement we both signed. I want clean separation without protracted legal battles. I want to move forward with my life, while you move forward with yours and Megan's. At the mention of Megan, Daniel's expression shifted subtly. Megan and I are navigating our own complications. Your romantic entanglements are no longer my concern, I replied firmly. My only interest is finalizing our divorce with terms that respect the prenuptial agreement and provide accurate valuation of all assets. And the company financial situation? The board? I recognized the real fear behind his question. Daniel's professional reputation, his entire identity as a successful entrepreneur, hung in the balance. Exposure of his financial misrepresentations would devastate more than his marriage. It would destroy his carefully cultivated image in the business community. I have no interest in corporate destruction, Daniel. The company employs dozens of people who bear no responsibility for your personal choices. But I won't accept devalued company shares based on concealed financial problems either. Relief visibly washed over him. That's reasonable? More than reasonable. I've always been reasonable, I reminded him. You just confused my support with weakness. We rejoined the main conference room shortly thereafter, where the legal teams had outlined initial settlement frameworks. Catherine raised a questioning eyebrow, which I answered with a subtle nod. Our private conversation had been productive, if not in the way Daniel might have hoped. The remainder of the settlement conference proceeded with surprising efficiency. Daniel's team, perhaps recognizing their diminished negotiating position, offered terms much closer to the prenuptial provisions than their initial posturing had suggested. Catherine secured fair valuation of the company's shares based on pre-expansion, metrics, a substantial cash settlement, and continued ownership of our mountain property in Aspen, which had always held special meaning for me. By late afternoon, preliminary agreement had been reached on all major points, with attorneys tasked to draft formal settlement documents within the week. This is a favorable outcome, Catherine observed as we gathered our materials afterward. They conceded on nearly every substantive issue. Daniel recognized his position was untenable, I replied, and I believe he genuinely wants to avoid further confrontation. Whatever his motivation, the result serves your interests well. Once the formal agreement is signed, you'll have complete financial independence and clean separation from both Daniel and the company's uncertain future. As we exited the hotel into the clear winter afternoon, I felt a weight lifting, not completely gone, but substantially lightened. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I could envision my future with genuine optimism rather than determined resolve. That evening, I visited the mountain property that would remain mine under the settlement terms. The Aspen cabin had been our weekend retreat, a place where cell service was spotty and Denver's business pressures seemed distant. I had always loved its rustic luxury, the massive stone fireplace, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing mountain views, the wraparound deck where we'd spent countless mornings with coffee and evenings with wine. Standing in the great room as darkness fell outside, I allowed memories to surface without resistance. Daniel and I skiing fresh powder on winter mornings, negotiating furniture choices when we first purchased the property, making love on the bearskin rug before the fireplace during a spring snowstorm that had knocked out the electricity. These memories no longer carried the acute pain of recent weeks. Instead, they felt like artifacts from someone else's life, valuable, but no longer. Defining my present reality, I could acknowledge what had been genuine in our connection without letting it overshadow Daniel's ultimate betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Settlement documents drafted. Will send for review tomorrow. Nearly done. Nearly done. The words echoed as I built a fire in the stone hearth, warming the cabin against the mountain night. My marriage was nearly done. The legal dissolution of a union that had emotionally concluded months earlier. The initial paperwork had been filed barely 6 weeks ago, but the expedited timeline reflected Daniel's eagerness to avoid both publicity and deeper financial scrutiny. I curled into the oversized armchair by the fire, wrapped in a soft throw blanket, and allowed myself to contemplate life beyond divorce. My consulting business was gaining momentum, with 5 clients now and promising conversations with several more. The downtown apartment lease would expire in May, perfectly timed for Denver's real estate high season if I decided to purchase something permanent. Most importantly, I was rediscovering aspects of myself that had been gradually subsumed during my marriage. Professional ambitions, personal interests, friendships that had taken secondary priority to Daniel's social and business connections. The woman emerging from this crucible was both familiar and new, stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. My contemplation was interrupted by another text message, this one from Megan. Baby arrived early this morning. 6 Libby's 8OZ, named him Ethan. The news landed strangely, somewhere between distant curiosity and peculiar connection. Daniel's son had been born. A child who, under different circumstances, might have been my stepchild. A boy who would never know me but whose existence had irrevocably altered my life trajectory. After careful consideration, I replied simply, "Congratulations. Wishing you both health and happiness." Her response came quickly. "Thank you. I followed your advice and got my own lawyer. Best decision I could have made." This brought a small smile to my lips. Whatever complex emotions I harbored about Megan's role in my marriage's dissolution, I couldn't help appreciating the irony. Both women in Daniel's life had ultimately protected themselves legally rather than relying on his promises. The remainder of winter passed in a blur of professional activity and legal formalities. The settlement agreement was signed and filed with the court, its terms reflecting the prenuptial provisions with minimal adjustments. Daniel's fabricated claims about my alleged affair with James Everett were quietly withdrawn, removed from court filings without further mention. Judge Harmon granted our divorce decree in early March, officially ending our marriage in a brief courthouse proceeding that Daniel didn't attend. Catherine explained he was in Chicago, presumably with Megan and their newborn son, but his absence felt appropriate. Our marriage had ended months earlier in emotional reality. The legal formality was merely administrative. "Congratulations, I suppose," Catherine said afterward as we descended the courthouse steps. "Though that seems an odd word for the occasion." "Actually, it fits," I replied, surprised by the genuine lightness I felt. "This represents freedom and new beginning, which are worth celebrating." The spring thaw brought literal and metaphorical renewal to Denver. As the mountains emerged from snow cover and crocuses pushed through softening soil, my own life blossomed with fresh possibilities. My client roster expanded sufficiently to justify hiring an assistant, an irony not lost on me. I purchased a townhouse in the Highland neighborhood, its contemporary design and rooftop deck offering views of both downtown and the mountains beyond. Most significantly, I reclaimed my maiden name, Jordan, shedding the last formal connection to my marriage. Rachel Jordan. The name felt both familiar and new, like rediscovering a beloved sweater packed away and forgotten. To Rachel Jordan. And her magnificent resurrection, Olivia toasted during a small dinner gathering at my new home. Emily, Mark, and several other close friends raised their glasses in agreement, their faces reflecting genuine happiness for my emerging stability. As the evening progressed into comfortable conversation and shared laughter, I found myself observing the scene with peculiar detachment, not in a negative sense, but with newfound perspective. 6 months earlier, my identity had been so thoroughly entwined with Daniel's that his betrayal had seemed to destroy my entire foundation. Now, surrounded by friends in a home I had selected and furnished entirely to my own taste, I recognized that foundation had never truly collapsed. It had simply been revealed beneath the structures I had mistaken for permanent. The final psychological milestone arrived unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I was reviewing a marketing campaign for a new client when my assistant announced a package delivery requiring signature. The courier handed me a small box with Daniel's name on the return label, the first direct communication since our divorce finalization. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a familiar object, the sapphire necklace I had discovered in Daniel's cloud account screenshots months earlier. The necklace he had purchased for my birthday, but apparently given to Megan instead. A small card accompanied it with a handwritten note. This was always meant for you. One of many promises I failed to keep. I'm sorry. D. I studied the delicate pendant, oval blue stone in a simple platinum setting, suspended from a fine chain. It was beautiful, exactly the style I had always preferred. In another lifetime, it would have been a thoughtful, meaningful gift from husband to wife. Now, it was simply a relic, a physical representation of broken promises and discarded commitments. Whatever Daniel's intention in sending it, the gesture felt hollow, perhaps even manipulative in its apparent contrition. Without hesitation, I placed the necklace in my desk drawer and returned to my work. Later that week, I donated it to the Children's Hospital charity auction, the same event where Daniel and I had met years earlier. The symmetry felt appropriate, closing a circle that had opened with well-intentioned romance and closed with clear-eyed reality. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself hosting my own holiday gathering, smaller and less formal than our previous entertaining, but warm with genuine connection. Emily and her husband, Olivia and Mark, now herself sporting an engagement ring, Catherine and her wife, and several newer friends gathered around my dining table. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, rising with wineglass in hand. To unexpected journeys and the strength we discover along the way. To prenuptial agreements. This drew knowing laughter from the group, and to the futures we build on our own terms. To Rachel, Catherine added, raising her glass higher, who turned betrayal into liberation with more grace than anyone I've encountered in 20 years of family law. As conversation and laughter filled my home, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with Daniel, Megan, or the drama that had consumed last year's holiday. The prenup clause that had provided my legal protection had ultimately delivered something far more valuable than financial security. It had given me the foundation upon which to rebuild my life entirely on my own terms. Daniel's pregnant assistant, showing up at our family dinner, had indeed changed everything, but not in the way either of them had anticipated. Instead of crushing me, their betrayal had ultimately freed me to discover my own resilience, reclaim my professional identity, and create a life more authentically aligned with my values, than the marriage had ever been. As I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me through the darkest moments, I silently thanked the younger version of myself who had insisted on that prenuptial agreement despite romantic protestations. She had somehow known that protection wasn't cynical, but prudent, that independence wasn't unromantic, but essential. That woman, clear-eyed, pragmatic, fundamentally self-respecting, had never truly disappeared. She had simply been waiting for me to remember her existence. Now reunited with that core strength, I faced forward into a future entirely of my own design, the prenup clause having served its purpose not just legally, but transformationally. The irony wasn't lost on me. The legal document Daniel had signed, with casual dismissal, believing we would never need it, had ultimately become the instrument of my liberation when his choices made it necessary. Sometimes the most important provisions are the ones we hope never to invoke, but their existence provides the security to move forward with confidence, come what may. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.